Understanding what assets your business has that are fundamental to the successful operation of your business is one of the most basic requirements of information security. If you don't know what data you have, you don't know where it's stored, and you don't know who has access to it, you're really going to struggle to understand how to secure these things. After all, if you don't know about it, you can't secure it. In this video, we're going to look at how to create an information asset register. And so by the end of this video, you'll have a really thorough understanding of where your data lives, who has access to it, and how critical it is to your business. My name is Mike Pearce, and this is my series on information security. Every week, I bring you some really simple ideas on how to improve your information security posture, and some not so simple ones, but still pretty important things to do, and how best to protect your business and maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all of your resources. This is so cyber criminals are unable to misuse your data for their nefarious means. You should care about this stuff because at its heart, information security is looking after the things that your business needs to run properly. And if you don't have those things, or they're modified, or they're stolen, it's going to be much harder for you to do business in the way you want to. I really hate saying this, but like this video and subscribe so whenever I make new content, you're notified about it. And we can spread the word, and hopefully we can make the internet a much safer place. So you might be asking yourself, but Mike, what is an asset register? Well, let me tell you. An asset register is a list or inventory of all the important things that your business has and needs to get business done. Think of it as like a giant database or spreadsheet of all the things that are valuable to your business. It's important to point out that an asset register doesn't have to be one artifact, it could be many, but for the purposes of this video, we're just going to be talking about one. But as an example, your IT team might have a list of all your hardware assets, so they might track who's got what laptops, who's got what phones, and that kind of stuff. Your DevOps team are likely going to have a list of all the servers that they use and the data that's stored on those servers. One size definitely doesn't fit all. But if you don't have one, or you're not sure what your information asset register looks like, it's better just to create one from scratch. You can always merge them together a bit later. So what is an asset? In my last video, I talked about the two most valuable assets you have, and that's your data and the processes that generate or consume that data. However, while those are your two most fundamental assets, your business still has a lot of supporting assets that go into making up the processes and procedures and the data in your business. An information asset is defined as anything that can store, process, or transmit data. This includes the data itself and hardware such as laptops and mobile phones, and even your network. Some examples of these are things like databases of customers, or databases that support your application and service, which your customers might store their data in, email and productivity services such as Google or Outlook, and your hosting providers such as AWS or Azure, and also the people needed to run these tools and services such as your IT team, your DevOps team, or your engineering department. Step 0 in creating an information asset register is to decide and understand what counts as an information asset at your organization. The way to look at information assets is it's anything that your business has that needs to be protected from cyber threats and cyber vulnerabilities. The most common sets of data that people generally have that are stored in multiple locations that you can start with are data about your customers, the data your customers store as a consequence of kind of using your service or your app, data about your employees, this is kind of their personal information or their financial information like bank details. There's financial information about the organization itself, so your budgeting process, your budgeting files, your financial files, your banking details of the organization. There's things like code and configuration data for that code and the services or servers on which they live. And then there are things like documents about the business, so strategy and business plans and objectives and all that kind of stuff. Thing is though, the data doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's stored on things like servers and laptops. So we also need to take that kind of stuff into account too. So the first thing we do when creating an information asset register is to identify who your stakeholders are. So these are the people that own the data sets or are responsible for the data sets. These are going to be your internal users, your internal stakeholders. There'll be people like your IT team, your IT staff. There'll be heads of business units like sales and marketing. They're going to be your engineering department, or maybe your tech leads or your CTO, people like that. They're going to understand where the data is and what it's used for. So once you've identified who these people are, you make a big old list and you take a guess at what kind of data that they might be looking after. Just put it into a spreadsheet. Doesn't matter too much for now. Just have a guess about what they might be using and what they might be using it for and who might have access to it. You're potentially going to be booking a few meetings with these people over a period of time, so you're going to have to get friendly with them. Now you've got a big old list of all the types of assets that you're going to have at your organization, and another big old list, well, probably the same list actually, of people who might be responsible for those assets. Time to start talking. Book in a session with each of these people and start the conversation. Structure the interviews so that for each person you talk to, you can talk through your defined list of what counts as an asset. So things like your hardware and your data and your people and that kind of stuff. You want to be asking them, what data do you store? What data do you process? Where do you store it? How do you process it? Who has access to it? Now, talking to people is a great way of understanding this stuff. And I would always suggest you go there first. And if you don't have any other way of doing that, that's perfectly fine. Other ways you can do this is by using automated scanning tools. You can use tools that scan your network, looking for hardware assets and that kind of thing. Another good way of finding out what assets you have is like other data sources. So a bit of review, a bit of a research of things like your company intranet, document stores, maybe Confluence, maybe Jira, there's going to be some stuff stored in there. You want to be looking for things like user guides or how-tos, and they might help you uncover some of the software or some of the information assets that you're using that maybe people don't know about or don't consider an information asset. Another great source of finding out what your company uses is checking out your invoices and your purchase records and even kind of bank statements and looking for things that you're paying for as an organization that maybe people don't recognize as an information asset. Record all this information in a spreadsheet for now. You might be tempted to look at an asset management tool, but depending on the size of your organization, it's probably not worth it. Even if you are going to use an asset management tool, I'd start with a spreadsheet because it's much more flexible and it's much easier to share that way. In the comments below, you'll find a link to a template that I created that will get you started. Copy that, modify it, do what you will, but start creating your information asset register in a spreadsheet first.
A few moments later.
Congratulations! You now have a huge list of assets and places they're stored and people that use and manage those assets, and you've probably also lost your voice from so much talking as well. You've probably also done some basic categorization in terms of kind of hardware and software and data and people, and that's great, but you might want to go another level of classification because it helps you manage your asset register much easier. If you've not done that, now's the time to start. Like I said, I'd use the basic software, hardware, data, personnel, cloud services. The next step, and probably quite a simple one, is to understand the criticality of each of these data assets, how important it is, and what impact to the business it would have if it were compromised. Critical assets are going to be your application database, your CRM, and your employee data. Non-critical assets are going to be things like marketing materials, laptops, phones, that kind of thing. They might seem like they're critical, laptops and phones, but they can easily be replaced, and your business isn't going to fall over overnight if those things disappear. That's the way to look at critical assets, is to decide if that was missing or compromised, would your business fall over? Would you not be able to generate any revenue? The next step is to classify your data, and it might sound like categorization, and they're very similar words, but it's not quite the same. You classify the data based on its exposure. Now, there's a whole other video that I'm going to put together to describe this stuff in much more detail, but I'll go through the basics right now. Start with, there's 4 levels. There's public, internal, confidential, and restricted. Public data is, as it sounds like, it's stuff that if it was disclosed to the public, it wouldn't make any difference. It might even benefit your company. This is stuff like marketing materials, your website, published research papers, that kind of thing. The next is internal data. Internal data is data that can be shared within the organization by anybody but shouldn't be made public. This is stuff like internal policies and procedures, memos, organization charts, that kind of stuff. Next is confidential data. Confidential data is stuff that's sensitive and should be restricted to certain departments or certain employees. You wouldn't want everybody in the organization knowing about this. Some examples are, employee personal records, financial information, non-disclosure agreements you've got with clients or partners, and things like internal reports and strategic plans. Finally, the highest level of classification is restricted data. This is the stuff that is really, really key to your business and you don't want to share with anybody except the people that absolutely have to have it. Some examples of this are things like your customer data. So if you manage a service or an application that stores customer data, you absolutely don't want anybody having access to that data except for the customer themselves. It's also things like proprietary business information, your IP, trade secrets. It also includes things like health records. So if you've got health records of your employees, they would be classed as restricted. And also things like passwords, secure configuration, keys for your services, that kind of stuff. That's all restricted too. Now, if categorization and classification sounds like a lot of work, it is a little bit of work, but it's really, really important to do. because it's a great way to reduce the number of information assets you have that you need to run a risk assessment on, you need to add into the scope of whatever information security standard or process you're going to put in place. For example, it's unlikely you'd run any information security risk assessment on your public data. It's there to be shared with the public, so if it was disclosed, then it doesn't really matter too much. Even some of your internal data or a subset of your internally classified data, you might not want to run risk assessment on. It might be fine. You might deem that if it's internal, but if it did get out, it's very low risk. So now you have a thorough understanding of what types of data you've got and where it is, who looks after it, how critical it is to your business, and what the classification level is. This really helps you understand what your focus should be for the next step of building out your kind of information security management system or your framework. You now know which of the things you need to prioritize on, which are the most valuable, critical, and sensitive bits of data or other assets or supporting assets that you need to focus on. After all, there's no point in wasting a huge amount of effort on low-risk data sets at the beginning of your journey. Once you've got an established information security framework, you might want to consider that stuff, but if it's low risk, then you don't need to do it first off. So now you've got a pretty detailed and thorough understanding of all of the information assets and supporting assets at your business and the people. It should cover hardware, software, data, and personnel. And each of these assets are important to the running of your operational side of the business, your revenue generating side. So what next? Well, you've probably spent a lot of time on this, creating the register, interviewing people, classifying and categorizing, talking, and probably a whole lot of typing as well. Unfortunately, it will very, very quickly, if you're a fast-moving company like a startup or a scale-up, go out of date. So the next step is to put some processes and a schedule in place to review your information asset register regularly. So as well as putting a date in your calendar to remind you to review the information asset register regularly, I recommend every 6 months, but certainly not any less frequent than annually. It's also important that you try and hook into your procurement process, and this is one of the really easy ways to be able to see any new information assets that are coming on board. Make friends with people in the finance department or the procurement department and bolt something onto their processes which has them inform you or your information security committee, or whoever it is who's managing this stuff, of any new things that are procured. Majority of which you can probably ignore, maybe things like mice and keyboards, you don't care about that kind of stuff. But if new software, new hardware, or new laptops, or new types of laptops or devices are being procured, then you'll want to know about it so you can add them to your information asset register. If you're building software, it's very likely that there's going to be new data stores about customers or for customer information being created and put into production. Get yourself involved in product demos and conversations about roadmaps so you understand what's coming down the pipeline and what you should be adding to your information asset register. Don't be afraid to ask really basic, really silly questions like, where are you storing that data? Where is that data coming from? And who's going to have access to that data? It might seem like these are questions that people should already know the answers to, and so why are you asking them, Mike? Are you dumb? But the thing is a lot of people assume that this kind of stuff is known, and it isn't. So asking these really simple questions is a really good way to uncover this stuff. So, sounds like a lot, and it can be, but it is fundamental to getting your information security posture robust at your organization. So to wrap up, you simply need to follow these steps. 1, decide on what information assets you want to track. What is an information asset at your organization? 2, work out who your stakeholders are, write them in a big old list. 3, here's where the hard work is, inventory your assets. Talk to all these people, write down what they say, understand where the data is, where's it stored, and who has access to it. 4, categorize and classify this data so you understand what is critical, what is not critical, what is restricted and what is confidential, and all that kind of stuff, so you can focus your efforts on the right things for the next step of the process. And 5, and really importantly, you shouldn't forget this one, is build some process or procedure around keeping the information asset register up to date. Check the description below for links to a few free tools we've got, including the information asset register template that I mentioned, some training around risk management, and a couple of other templates that might be useful to you. Again, I hate saying this, but like this video and subscribe to be notified of when I create some more content. And like I said, if we get more people watching this stuff, then hopefully we can make the internet a safer place. Thank you very much, and see you next time.